Good morning. Wow, what a morning already to start this day off. Um, Technical difficulty, so I apologize for that. I was going to try to do this on my computer, and Facebook has changed how you do things and settings, so I couldn't get it to work. And then I had to try to do this, find it on my iPad, and I couldn't find it on my iPad. So finally, I am here to worship with you at my home this morning. So apologize for the delay, but we're here. Before we have my message for this morning, just wanted to say thank you to a whole bunch of people. It's been a tough week. I didn't realize, when you go into isolation and can't go anywhere, that's pretty big deal. It's not fun. It's not exciting. Betty is starting to feel better. I think she's gone a day, maybe day and a half without a fever. So that's good news. And none of us so far have got any symptoms. But we have to be quarantined till the 14th. So we got another week of joy together. But the good news is we're all still alive and we haven't killed each other. So, that's something. But I also want to thank all the prayers, support, especially for the food that people brought. Has been amazing. Really appreciate those that baked cookies and made cookies for me. I did share a few of those, but I ate most of them. And my doctor will not be happy when I do my next blood work for my blood sugar, which is not good. But anyway, I did enjoy it. So, and I did share a few with the kids. Well, I want to get started with our message for today. It comes from Chronicles. We don't really preach a lot out of Chronicles, but today we will. It's from the 16th chapter, verses 23 to 31. And this is what it reads. Sing to the Lord, all the earth. Proclaim his salvation day after day. Declare his glory among the nations, his marvelous deeds among all peoples. For great is the Lord, and most worthy of praise is he to be feared above all gods. For all the gods of the nations are idols, but the Lord made the heavens. Splendor and majesty are before him. Strength and joy are in his dwelling place. Ascribe to the Lord, all you families of nations. Ascribe to the Lord glory and strength. Ascribe to the Lord the glory due his name. Bring an offering and come before him. Worship the Lord in splendor of his holiness. Tremble before him, all the earth. The world is firmly established. It cannot be moved. Let the heavens rejoice. Let the earth be glad. Let them say among the nations, the Lord reigns. Let us pray together. Gracious God, it is amazing how we can use the tools we have today to stay connected, to still worship, to still be able to come together in this difficult time. Thank you, and we give you glory and praise this day. Amen. Well, in honor of musicians around the world, I wanted to share this little story between a pastor and the music leader. Now, this is one of those not so great instances where the pastor and the music minister or leader were at odds with one another, and they were trying to one-up each other, and kind of the pastor felt the music minister, had something against him. So here's how the story goes. They were, like I said, they weren't getting along. But the problem is that it started going over into the worship service. So one week, the pastor was preaching a sermon on commitment, and he wanted everyone to dedicate themselves to God and be more committed to the Lord. And the closing song the music director preached or played that day, and they sang, was I Shall Not Be Moved. Well, the second week, the pastor preached on tithing and how we should all give to the Lord and to his work. Well, that week, the director of music played the song at the end, Jesus Paid It All. The third week, the preachers started to preach about gossiping and how we should not talk among ourselves about other people and watch our tongues. And the music director wanted to have a little fun with that. So the closing song that week was "I Love to Tell the Story." Well, the pastor was getting a little disgusted by the music director and what she was doing. And so he got so bad that he talked about maybe resigning from the church. So he announced that he was frustrated and he was considering that resigning. And the musician on that Sunday played the closing song, "Oh, Why Not Tonight?" Well, after this next week, the pastor did decide to resign. And in his closing message to the congregation, he said that Jesus brought me here and Jesus is taking me away. And the music leader played the final song that day, "What a Friend We Have in Jesus." Well, it can be kind of fun and what you can do with music and preaching, but it's exciting when everything works together, especially when we think about the connection between music, preaching, prayers, and all is about worship. And that's what I wanted to talk to you about today is worship. And to do that, I need to give a little background because I don't think a lot of people know or read much about Chronicles. So if you look in the Old Testament, and if you go and starting in Judges, and Judges talks about a time in Israel's history where there were no kings, that if there was a problem, that God would raise up a leader, and they would take care of the issue. So if there was an enemy, they would raise up a leader. Some of the most famous judges that most of you know is Samson. He fought the Philistines. Gideon, who was pretty popular, and the final judge was Samuel. At Samuel's time, the people wanted to be like everyone else, and so you have what comes following Samuel, 2 Samuel, or 1 Samuel, is a history of the kings. Or I should say not 1 Samuel, but Judges. 1 and 2 Samuel is the beginning of the history of kings. Goes into 1 and 2 Kings, and then 1 and 2 Chronicles. The difference between those is 1 and 2 Samuel talks about Saul, David, mostly, and the transition to Solomon near the end of David's life. And it talks about the beginning of that kingdom. In Kings, it talks about all of the kings in the history of this region, which includes both kingdoms. Because under David and Solomon was really the only time that there was a united kingdom, which was Israel and Judah. In Kings, 1 and 2 Kings, it talks about kings from Israel and kings from Judah. And it talks about all of them, the good and the bad. Chronicles, the one I read this morning, talks about specifically David and Solomon and the building of the temple, and that's its focus. And it only really talks about the kings of Judah, and specifically David, Solomon, and what they do in building the temple. And so that's why it's significant to think about this passage about worship, because the temple was the center of worship. The temple is where God was at. That's literally, they believe God physically dwelled in this temple. So it's about worship. And so when we read this passage in Chronicles, it tells us a lot in it about worship. And worship is something that's always been throughout the Old Testament, through the New Testament. It's central, it's important. It's one of the things that God requests of us. Why? Because God deserves it, and it brings him glory and honor. And so when you read this passage, we get an idea of what worship was like then, and really what worship is for us today. It talks about in this passage about singing to God, singing about God. It talks about worship is proclaiming the salvation of all humanity. Worship is about thanksgiving. It's about what God has done for us and for all the world. When we worship, we should do so with joy. We should offer ourselves to God, not only an offering, but an offering ourselves to God. And when we worship, we should do so in a spirit of fear and trembling. And this is not as one who's terrified of God, but one who looks at God in awe and wonder. And so that is what the elements of worship is all about, in the way it's been from the beginning, the way it should be today. And if it's about glorifying God from the heart. It's about something that's exciting. It's about something that is fulfilling and bringing us closer to God. Now, if you would survey most teenagers today, if you would think about when you were a teenager, and if you would think about probably quite a few adults today, if you would ask them to describe what worship was like, one word that you would get often is the word boring. And let's face it, that's what a lot of people think about worship. It is boring. It's not exciting. It's not something that people want to go be part of. Now, there are exceptions to it, and some of you have grown to appreciate the worship as it is. But, there's a lot of people who just think, well, it's boring. Well, why is it that so many people think that worship is boring? Well, part of the reason is the experience that many people have in churches all over the country is that when you go into a church, it's routine, it's stale, it's predictable, it's familiar. It's boring, it's rigid. We don't do anything different. We are creatures of habit, and we like to do the same things over and over again. Now, if it wasn't for Carolyn and Betty as well, you'd probably have only about 20 different songs that you would sing throughout the Sundays, because I only know about 20 songs. And if I don't know it, I don't pick it. And so I pick out these songs, and Carolyn says, well, this would be a great song. I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, go for it. Because I don't know. Because I am a creature of habit. I'm a creature that says, I want to do what I'm familiar with. And we have a tendency to do that we want to do what is familiar. And if you're wondering, it's like, well, I don't know if we're really that rigid in what we think about worship. Well, let me tell you this. To prove a point on this, and you can do this experiment, all you have to do is determine if a church is rigid in its worship, very routine. All you have to do is the pastor has to change one thing out of the legal guide on Sunday, or what we call a bulletin. And so you take that bulletin, you change one thing, move it around, maybe not even remove something, but just move it, and people are staring at you. They're looking around and says, what are we doing in this spot? This is the third thing we do in worship. We're supposed to sing a song, and the third thing we do at the time of 10:41 a.m. every Sunday. What is this we're doing now? And so we get a little frustrated. We get confused and thinking, oh dear, we've changed the order of worship. That's just one example to show that at times we do become rigid in how we approach worship. And I can't see you, but I can just imagine some of you are laughing, snickering, and smirking, because it is true that we are creatures of habit. And then when we look at our legal guide on Sunday, our bulletin, we don't want it to change. We like it the way it is. And that means our worship pretty much stays the same. But what have we experienced the last several months? It has been a drastic change in what we're used to. Worship has changed so much that it's really difficult for pastors to get used to, because it's nothing we've been trained for, most of us. There's some things that are not ideal. There's some things that are frustrating. I think that one of the probably the most frustrating things is being able to sing inside the church building together. Methodists are known for their harmonies, and that's part of our tradition. And you take that away, it makes it difficult. But there's some other things that we could say, well, this is a good thing. One of those things is that we become more flexible, more adaptable. Worship hasn't been as rigid as it's been in the past because we can't. We're virtual right now. We started this way. We moved to being able to do a little bit on Sundays with the video. And now we're back at home, for me at least, for this Sunday. Hopefully, if everything works out, I will be back in the pulpit in worship Sunday, this next Sunday. But it's challenging for us because it's new. But we're able to reach people that we've never reached before. We're able to worship when, right now we can't get out. And just think, when the wintertime comes, this is still a tool that instead of just canceling church, we can still worship together because we can do it online. I remember one of the valuable lessons I learned as an Army chaplain is every day is Sunday. And what that means is that if you're on a mission, you're deployed, if you're in the middle of something, you can't perhaps worship on a Sunday. But Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, morning, evening, whatever time, it doesn't matter. The important thing was that you had to be flexible with the circumstances. And during this pandemic, we've had to be flexible with the circumstances. That we've had to change how we worship. But we've still been able to worship. And I think one of the exciting things about this, though, is, we want the community, we want to sing together. But one of the good things that has happened is people have experienced more intimacy and more of a personal worship between God and themselves by being at home, because there's no one else. You can watch this, you can reflect, you can think more about God, you can take your time. And Sunday, it's, we're driven by a clock. Let's face it. There's few traditions that ignore the clock. We expect an hour of worship, and I honor that and I believe in that. But there's so much more you can do at more than an hour. And when you're at home, you don't have those constraints. You can spend all day in worship with God. And so the important thing is that we remember worship, whether we're at home or in person, is about glorifying God. It's supposed to be exciting. It's supposed to be majestic. It's supposed to be fun. Worship can be fun. I know the fun word is not something that people like too much to hear. I found that here at Stidham, it's more acceptable to have fun. I was actually at a church where I had two people leave. Literally, they told me because I was too jovial. I'm like, okay, sorry, I didn't mean to not be, depressing and miserable while I preached, because I like to have fun. Because I think that's what part of life is. God wants us to have fun, and part of that is worship. It's not supposed to be boring. In fact, I think boring worship is a sin. A boring sermon is a sin. In my years, I've sinned a lot on that. And I try not to. I try to make it exciting and fun as possible. But there's some times worship, I've come out of worship and I've thought, wow, I wish I wasn't even here. There's times I've preached a sermon, I've come from the pulpit, and it's like, I don't even know what I was talking about. So yeah, there's been some duds in life, but you're going to have those. You move on. The goal is to try to enjoy it, to keep up the passion for worship, to be as exciting as possible, to not make it so routine and boring. And that if something changes, this is my encouragement. If something changes, take a deep breath and go with the flow. It's the season we live in. It's ever changing. And churches all over the country had to mix it up. I mean, the joke for us pastors has been in one day we all became televangelists. It's not something that I particularly enjoy, but it's what I have to do. But it's part of worship. And since, the Spirit is with us and encouraging us, we can adapt. We can make this the best we can. And so, have an open mind. Be led by God's Spirit, not by routine, not by the bulletin. Just let it flow. Worship is really about God, not about what you get out of it. If we get something out of it, that's a blessing. But it's about glorifying God because he deserves it. It's about praising all of his works. It's about giving thanks. It's about celebration. That's the way worship should be. And sometimes it can be very spontaneous. It doesn't have to be in a church building. I've said this for decades. Worship can be at home. Well, just about everybody's experiencing that right now. All over the country. They're learning worship doesn't have to be in a church. It can be at home. And it can still be a time of celebration, excitement, and joy. So let's just keep worshiping God. Let's be flexible. Let's be adaptable. And do the best we can. And work with what we got. God bless.